like to welcome our next speaker, and he will be introduced by Sudhanshu Karib. He is the Vice President of Cybersecurity, Governance, Risk, and Compliance for Comcast Corporation. So Sudhanshu, please.
Thank you. So I wanted to introduce Eric Berger, who is the Chief Technology Officer at the FCC. He is an advisor to the Chairman of Technology Engineering on engineering and technology issues together with the Office of Engineering and Technology. So prior to joining the commission, Eric served as the director of Georgetown site of the NSF Security and Software Engineering Research Center in DC. He's also had senior engineering and technology positions in various telecommunication companies, network equipment manufacturers, and served as a technology consultant to others. He also taught computer science at Georgetown University, George Mason University, and George Washington University, and holds patents in telecommunications and is an expert in standards for telecommunications, network, and internet technologies. He also holds a PhD in computer science from the Illinois Institute of Technology and an MBA from Catholic University from Belgium and a bachelor's from MIT. So welcome, Eric.
Thanks a lot. So the technology keynote, which I've appropriately titled the Cybersecurity Technology and the Government Industrial Academic Complex. Actually, Eisenhower's statement, it was military industrial, but also included the academy was part of that. Let me though think about my notes, but while I'm thinking about my notes, cool. So first, the standard government disclaimer. These are my opinions, and I'll read this to you so it's in the record. The lawyers are big on the record. They're my opinions, not the opinions of the Federal Communications Commission. They don't necessarily represent the policies or positions of the United States government or the FCC. If you've been watching the nomination hearings, you'll learn that the FCC is not exactly an executive branch government, so we wouldn't be representing the executive branch anyway, but this is just me. The same also goes for the CERC, that I'm not necessarily representing the policies or opinions or positions of the affiliates of the CERC or Georgetown University. But I will talk a little bit about government. I don't know, is that visible? Or for those who are having trouble seeing, that's a far, far away mountain. Think about Deuteronomy, it's not up in heaven, that you would say, who shall go up to us for us to heaven and bring it to us? Of course, here we're not talking about the Bible or the Torah, we're talking about cybersecurity technology, and policy. A lot of people are thinking, gosh, this cyber stuff is really hard, it's really far away, it's not my job, it's someone else's job, who's going to do it for me? And that does bring me to a question. How many people here are technologists? That's a good bunch. How many are policy people? I see one, at least one writer person. Who else do we have that's like neither technology, neither policy? Cool, thank you for coming, because it's good for people to get kind of the broader input. So one question, and you heard Chris's talk, where is the technology related to cybersecurity and government? And this is part of that faraway mountain motif. Does the government tell you what's good for you? In some industries, the industry looks to government to tell it what to do. This is an area where we look the government looks more to industry to help and help inform us, and sometimes even help us when we need to tell you what to do. Tell us what we need to tell you to do. As a concrete example, I wanted to touch upon BGP. This is an example of government in cyber. A lot of people think of, oh, cyber, that's DHS, that's the NKIC, that's information sharing. It's a lot deeper than that. Starting from the bottom, back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, the National Science Foundation funded fundamental research on how do we secure routing in the internet. So almost 20 years ago. NIST got involved starting around 2004 with a project called Robust Interdomain Routing. Again, okay, we've got this fundamental research, we've got some algorithms, we've got some ideas. How can we, in a sense, make them more real, make them more concrete? Now, if you think, oh, they started in 2004, it's almost 15 years later, they're done. Well, we're still working on it, and in fact, ways that you can interact with government is they've published some draft best standards, best practices for interdomain routing, and they've asked for comments which are due in about a month. So especially the technologists here, maybe take a look at it, because again, the government is not coming with all the answers. Quite often we are creating forums to help get the answers and to help get everyone signed on. But it's not just the NSF, not just NIST. There's another part of DHS besides what NPPD is now called, but there's science and technology. So, all right, let's come up with some fundamental algorithms. How can we secure routing? Come up with some best practices. And then, all right, let's actually build some of it. And so science and technology at DHS funded some work in that area for actually helping the standardization process move along, for example, at the IETF. The FCC, and again, to make sure that it's in the record, the FCC does not do cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is not in the Communications Act. We do, though, deal with the reliability and security of the networks. That is in the Communications Act. And so CISRIC, which is a industry federal advisory committee to the FCC, has done a report, did one report in 2013, CISRIC 3 on BGP security. So this is kind of we've got the algorithm, we did the science, we got the algorithms, we got the ways to do it, we got it standardized. Hey, we think you ought to do it. And the current CISRIC, actually I've got that wrong, it says 4, it's CISRIC 6, work group 3, is working on reliability and security of IP-based networks, particularly focusing on 5th generation wireless networks. And that report is due out in March 2019. If you've really got nothing to do, or you are on billable hours for a company, you can watch live stream. The Technical Advisory Committee today, this afternoon, is going to be talking about some of these issues. So, I would hope it would be kind of clear. We're not saying what we're telling you what to do, but we are going to say, what does government need? Basically, if we're going to do some regulation, we need it to be well informed. So This is the big, hairy, scary chart. This is how regulation happens. It can start down on the legislative side where there's a bill. Congress tells an agency, we need regulation, and this is what it should do. And those bills are anywhere from make the network safe to we want you to do this, 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 and this. I would offer quite often when the legislature says do this, 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 and this, by the time we get around to it, industry is going, why would we ever want to do that? That's like 3-year-old stuff. So more often it's, we want to have some goal done. The other thing that sometimes happens is on the far right, where the agency itself says, hey, we need something. This is all governed by the stuff in the middle, the Administrative Procedures Act. And so whether it comes from Congress, comes from ourselves, I can't speak for other agencies, and I'm obviously not speaking for the FCC, but at the FCC, people can petition for rulemakings. So with all that on the input side, the agency would create a notice of a proposed rule. This is what we're thinking of doing. And the important part of that is to get comments. An important thing to realize about comments is the Administrative Procedures Act says we have to consider all the issues raised by the comments. It doesn't mean that we address and answer every comment, but that all the issues are raised. And the reason we do that is for the rest of the scary thing, because by the time you come up with an order, it needs to be enforced, and when it's enforced, the courts get involved. And so you want to make rules that will stand up to court scrutiny. And so why do I bring this up here? There are a number of things relating to cybersecurity that are either best practices. So just as Chris was saying, please be involved with information sharing. I'm going to be here please be involved with our work on security-related, or for that matter, technology-related efforts in the government. And as I mentioned, there's a bunch going on at NIST, DHS. You're going to hear a little later today from NTIA, and dealing with the reliability and integrity of the networks even at the FCC. Talk a little bit about what's going on in academia. For example, certificates are still a thing. And we're pretty good at dealing with certificates from a particular enterprise that you're trying to reach. However, the model that we have for certificates doesn't quite model the real world. The model for certificates is, I am an enterprise, I get my certificate, I load it on my server, you, the user, come to my server, I present my certificate, and life is good. Except that's not the way the world works. The world works in terms of, I'm an enterprise, I get a certificate, which I then hand over to my CDN provider. And in fact, I can speak personally, my personal CDN provider, so it's standardstrack.com, not FCC or Georgetown. If you look at my certificate, you will see that it represents me and about 40 of my closest friends that I never heard of before. Follows the standards, but is not that relationship of that you're coming to me. It could make for some interesting opportunities of me masquerading as one of those 40 people I've never heard of before. But as well, it has actual impacts on, for example, when there is a breach. University of Maryland has done some very interesting research into this, where they used the Heartbleed breach as an opportunity to find out how fast do people cycle their certificates, which is kind of one of those, we don't really know. If we call them up, they're not going to tell us because they probably don't even know. But here was an event where with Heartbleed, basically your private key, the thing you use to generate your half of the TLS connection, could have been compromised, and therefore you should have replaced it. Well, 3 years ago, they published some really interesting results on how people updated, but recently they've done some work because it turned out, it's not even my certificate that's representing my site. So not only do I not know it's breached, I'm not the one who's going to decide to update it. Another issue is we see a lot of mashups. If we're talking about the web, how do we do kind of third-party trust so that having all this content on one site? We see this a lot with ad networks, where ad networks sometimes behave badly, but yet it's all secure. And you think you're going to the home page on that. Another area that's being worked on is around identity. And this is kind of interesting because identity is a legal construct. So obviously there's a lot of legal research going on for identity. But we also look at what are the capabilities of the technology, because from a legal perspective and a policy perspective, we can come up with what do we mean by identity. But then we need the technical tools to implement that. So that's kind of a way where policy and law can drive technology. But we also see, like, for example, in the areas of blockchain and using blockchain for identity, that we have new technologies that can inform sort of the possible solution space on the regulatory, privacy, legal side that weren't really possible before or nobody thought of before. And so we have this nice interaction between sort of the cyber world and the technology world. So I was talking about that government industrial academic complex. I think for the rest of today, you're going to see kind of a good mix of that. Charles will be talking about some of the voluntary initiatives. How can we kind of get the policy objectives met without and I'll just put it up again, the really scary, hairy, kind of non-deterministic process. There's a lot of value in that. Going to look at an IoT case study. Again, how government and industry can work together, the kinds of things that government is doing to facilitate industry being able and the private sector to do what's needed. A big thing, even though I've been talking about like everything but information sharing, there's a session. It's still probably one of our best tools in the toolbox. Sam, talking about economics, or for those who know him, Shocky's Law, money's the answer. What's the question? There are a lot of issues where, and this is going to be one of the final sessions, where the costs of cyber breaches quite often are not borne by, obviously, the cost causers, but by the entities that have been breached. We see this quite often with like personal information and credit scoring. There have been studies that say, it impacts the individual to the tune of about $2,500, which isn't much, but if you've got millions of individuals, that's real money, but it's not borne by the entities that have been breached. And it's not like that money got taken out of the pockets of the people doing the breach. It's kind of an interesting, unfortunate, spirally, swirly ecosystem there. So with that, I also have a little bit of time for questions, and hopefully we'll be able to pull you back on track. There's a microphone coming down for you.
So you mentioned the problem with certificates, right? There's kind of like the centralization of trust, which, you know, it's kind of unclear what we are trusting. But there is kind of that centralization across the ecosystem with a lot of things now. Like with cloud computing, for example, you have multiple enterprises kind of using the same system, deploying different kinds of services with varying requirements for security on the same infrastructure. And you have, you know, kind of like 5 big cloud providers now. So you kind of create, yes, I mean, they have very good security, but you kind of have the central point of failure. So how do you, how do you address some of those challenges?
That's right, and that, if we had the answer, you wouldn't need academic research. Or if it was obvious, you would have a business. And I would offer that this is an opportunity for sort of a collaborative look at this problem. And it's not because there are some people who dogmatically will say, oh, industry consolidation is bad. And obviously we will be much better off if it was more fragmented. And there are others who, like in the terms of security, to say, well, hey, look, again, I've got my own site, and I'm running around doing FCC and Georgetown stuff. I don't have time to make sure the latest patch is on, or my certificate is up to date and all that. Isn't it better to be able to rely on these larger providers who have the economies of scale? I remember in the early days, about 6, 7 years ago, where the advice from government was everybody should be running a security operations center. Well, to have one person operating anything 7/24, so like a security operations center, that requires 5.2 people. And since you can't have a point person, that's 6 people. And that's only in the United States because we're stingy. We only give people 2 weeks vacation. In Europe, it's more like 10 people. That's not a problem for a Comcast. You have way more than one person on it full time. But for me, where I am only one person, to say I need to hire 5 more people and all I do is that security, that's obviously not going to work. So there's sort of a tension there. And so it's not, oh, the world's over because everyone is running either Google or Amazon or Microsoft. By the same token, if any of them have a fundamental basic problem, that's a swath of the infrastructure. So a good thing to look into. And it's also nice because there's the technology part, but there's also like this policy issue. Why do we care? I mean, it's private industry. If everyone decides to use a single company, what are we going to do about it? Except for when that company has a big problem, then everyone says, why didn't we do anything about it?
Good morning. Hank Kensington with Virginia Tech. Eric, if I heard you correctly, you said the FCC not involved in cybersecurity?
So cybersecurity...
So let me just continue.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, as 5G is being developed, does FCC have a role in ensuring that the security is built into 5G as it gets rolled out?
So we have a responsibility for the security and integrity of the networks. And this is why we have initiatives like the 2 CISRIC work groups, the TAC as well. And also facilitating, we have the outage reporting systems. So there's a lot of work that the FCC has been doing in the reliability and integrity, and security plays a role in that, especially as we talk about like software-defined networking. There was the big issue over 802.11 wireless routers. And that's a place where the FCC clearly has jurisdiction. To be clear, though, when people are thinking cybersecurity, often they're thinking about today's what was it? FBOT. Anyone is aware of FBOT? So this is malware that went after malware. And what we're not quite sure of is it malware or good malware? That is clearly the realm of DHS. If you want the FCC to be more involved, don't talk to us, talk to your legislator. Because we are, especially since we are not an executive branch agency, we do what Congress tells us.
Dr. Berger, thank you so much. We appreciate your comments
Thank you,
today.
Paul. Yeah.